people were illegally transported to these shores as what? As prisoners of war. Policing and penal practices and policies were enacted to terrorize and to control our people. Now, what evolved is what I call the criminal punishment system, not criminal justice system. It's a criminal punishment system. What evolved is that is a direct extension of the patty rollers whose job was to kidnap and return enslaved those who exercise their human right to be free, exercise their human right to be free. In the words of Gregorio Rodelli, he said that, you know, it didn't matter if we just walked away quietly in the night, like Harriet told me. It didn't matter if we orchestrated elaborate slave insurrections, okay, to express our human right to be free, such as Denmark VC. It didn't matter, because they were going to come after us with their dogs and with their patty rollers. They were going to come back to us. So what evolved as the criminal punishment system came from that. It came from the, as a result of the vagrancy laws, the chain gangs, the combat police system, what Michelle Alexander talked about it, the new Jim Crow, all the way down to police violence and murders, all the way down to mass incarceration. Mass incarceration in the war on drugs. As IBW says, the war on drugs is what? It's a war on black people. It has destroyed and it has disrupted and decimated millions of black families and communities. The vast damages as a result of this war, which has been the manifestation of the war on black people, the damage as a result must be remedied and must be repaired. Our demands are succinct yet comprehensive, ranging from resources for those returning to our communities from imprisonment, grants for opportunities to communities damaged by mass incarceration, the restoration of the voting rights for those formerly incarcerated, the exoneration of the Honorable Marcus Garvey, who was was the first target of what became known as the COINTELPRO, the FBI's illegal counterintelligence program. In fact, I'm looking around here right now. I see a whole lot of black identity extremists, those with African names, those with cultural clothing, those who believe in cultural pride, and those who believe in self-determination, those who believe in self-defense. That has now been criminalized under the FBI's new moniker, black identity extremists. Finally, and most critically important, the elimination of that phrase, that prison slavery exception slave in the 13th Amendment. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist, except, can you believe it's in that Constitution, except as punishment for a crime. These are our demands, reparations. Reparations now.
And one of the reasons we had this point on our 10-point plan, because if you don't own the communication system, your information will not get out. If you don't own it, you're dependent on somebody else to tell your story. It will not be his story that's meaningful to you. Now, I suspect that everybody who is sitting in this audience has been convinced that the city of Detroit declared bankruptcy. I know you heard about it, read about it, saw it on TV. The city never declared bankruptcy. I was on the city council. I'm telling you, as an elected official, the city never approved it, never wrote it, never asked for it. The governor, the same governor who poisoned Flint, Michigan, that racist governor, white supremacist, he wanted Detroit to go bankrupt, so he hired an emergency manager to take over the roles of the elected mayor and the elected city council, and to impose a bankruptcy and put it to a federal bankruptcy court. And that's what the judge did. As soon as he got Detroit's bankruptcy due, he went to work for the judge, went to work for the bankruptcy firm. Yes, he did. That's why we have to control our own media. Because if we don't tell our story through our own lens and our own filter, we're dependent on our historic enemies. to tell lies, then we will digest as truth. We need to stand and own and control our own information. I say. Moving from articulator to moderator, I come down. And we're calling our little sister who tore it up on Thursday night, introducing Danny Glover, and me shouting from the back of the room, waving my handkerchief in the air. We're calling our baby. Come on, Sister Francis. Oh, we're at point number one. Is there anybody who wants to do a response to point number one, which was led by Cam Howard, and point number two? Anyone who has a question about point number one, a formal apology. Point number two, point number one. Anybody want to respond to a formal apology? Yes. Pass the mic.
Let me just explain how we want to do this. We're going to go point by point, so it's not individual pronouncements. If you have something to say about this point, fine. You may not have anything to say about this. So then we're going to ask you, is there anything on point two? Whoever wants to respond to that, you may or may not. Point three, point four, point five, right down to number 10. So that's the way we want it. So I'll give another sister who wants to respond to point number one.
Good afternoon, I'm Son Lady. Yes, I have listened to, came Friday night and I'm here today, and I truly am just overwhelmed with the compassion that everyone is speaking with. And they're speaking with compassion out of compassion. So what I would like to say for point number one, and I did research. I think that it's time for us to not ask for an apology from our so-called United States. We welcome one, and we may even accept one. But I think it's time out now to ask for one. I think it's time for us to pray. Pray to God, to the God of the universe, that we will be given what's rightfully ours through what God is going to put on their hearts to deliver to us. Because we didn't get in this situation overnight. We're not coming out of it overnight. But we got to stop saying we're going to demand. We're just going to wait on that. But we're going to do the work that's going to make them give us an apology. So that's where I feel point number one should be added in. We welcome an apology, but we're going to hopefully no longer demand that apology because it's owed to us. All of history is telling us that they owe it to us. So we don't have to ask for what they should give in the first place.
I like that. I like God. That's the way to go, baby.
With point number one, first comes pain, then the apology. And we've not given the United States of America an offer that cannot refuse. So once that offer has been made that they cannot refuse, then that apology will come.
Hello, I'm William Francis from Suno. I wanted to say that I've been speaking with a lot of my friends and a lot of my classmates on this topic of reparations, and a lot of people feel, a lot of the younger people feel, that this is a big idea, it's this radical idea, and how can we really make this happen? And we've been trying to do this for so long. So with relation to this, they say, how are we going to get an apology from the American government? How would that happen? And I wanted to point out that the American government stepped in and compelled the Japanese government to apologize for its use of Chinese women as comfort women during their war. So this is not an unprecedented thing. The government has stuck its nose into the Kool-Aid of others So, I wanted to point that out. I'm speaking and I will be bringing, topics today. I will be bringing like to educational points.
Anyone else on point number one? Anything on point number one? That's the point of the apology. Point number two is
The right of repatriation.
right of repatriation is on point number two. Is it right on there?
That's right.
Okay, so, the right to repatriation, reminds me of Lincoln's plan to, for Liberia and repatriating us there. But what I would like to see as, also an option of actually, living or actually, moving to Africa is two things, which would include us as, what was it, the fifth nation or the fourth nation? The sixth nation. To include us to have acknowledged identities from the African Union as the sixth nation, and the right to travel. Possibly, if we're doing it as large as we are, issuances of passports that identify the diasporic Africans as the sixth nation. And then the second part of that, which is also in the healing, is the emotional emancipation healing circles. So that is something that I don't think that NAARC should be waiting on, which Community Healing Network is not waiting on. But as one of our first programs in pushing out even these 10 points, is that they could be in conjunction with our, emotional, pushing out the emotional emancipation healing. So.
Thank you very much. And now, anyone who wants to respond to point three, the right to land.
I still want to respond to point two. I want to further go on what Anika was speaking about with the emotional and healing emancipatory circles. In addition to those circles, we also need to emphasize and not overlook the African Knowledge Program, because as Sir Hillary Douglas was stating, we're building our pyramid. And so how can we build a pyramid if we're putting up our blocks the wrong way? So we need to start from little Kareem's age, even younger, and make sure that we are educating our people, educating our youth, and even educating our older, maybe more misguided members of our community, so that we can all join forces and be unified in this. Because if we are working together, we all have to be knowledgeable. And I think that we need to just make sure that we emphasize the African Knowledge Program in conjunction with the emancipatory circles, because that knowledge and healing together will really build us together.
Well said. Thank you. Point three, the right to land for social and economic opportunity development. Yes.
Yes. The question that I ask is, why have this program? Why even ask for reparations? And it comes down to, are we nation building or are we not? If we're nation building, then absolutely the demand for land is imperative. But if we're not nation building, then okay, you can give us land, you can give us you can give us economic development, but it all comes down to resources. It all comes down to economics, and economics is all about scarce resources. What land are we going to get? Are we building a nation? Are we talking about actual separation from this nation? Are we talking about having citizenship of our own nation? Because there's no need for us to have land if we're going to continue, there's no need for us to have land or reparations if we're going to continue to spend our dollars and be dependent on people who have no integrity.
Come on
no
now.
integrity, right? And we're expecting people who have, for hundreds of years, have had absolutely no integrity, have had murderous intent, and now we're going to ask them for reparations. We're going to ask them for land. So, if we're going to have land, then we also have to have a military. If we're going to have a military, we also have to have finances. So the question comes, are we nation building or are we not? If we're going to nation build, then we have to be fully committed. There is no half-stepping. I'm from California, and they say there's no such thing as halfway gangbanging. You can get killed.
That's right.
Right? There is no such thing as halfway nation building.
Say it.
That's good, son. That's good, son.
One of the guys who called my show, he's a professor out in California, and he said, you know, Chuck, historically when people talk about reparation, it wasn't always about land, right? But I've thought about that, and I don't know, I'm a little shaky on it. And I think that we have to be very, very, very careful when we talk about land. And the reason I say we have to be very careful, because when we say that we talk about reparations because of the damage, the exploitation, the oppression perpetrated against our people over the last 300, 400 years, 500 years, and we are standing on very solid moral ground, right? But you know, if we're not careful and we start talking about land, then we become complicit in the oppression of another people. You understand? And I'm the kind of person, I don't like living with contradictions, me. You understand? If I say, look man, you did this damage to me and you gotta pay for it. And listen, you damaged indigenous people too. Give me some of that stuff you got from them. You gotta be careful. And I'm not saying I have the answer. I'm just saying we gotta be careful when we talk about the land piece.
I'm going to speak on this too, because I spoke to one of the commissioners about this, but it's something in connection with what you're saying, and I do think that that's something that we as Black people should be part of our conversation in how we are talking about land. But in Reconstruction, it was connected with land. It was connected with all of these 10 points. And when you talk about the substantial tracts of government and public land, it does reference Native Americans. And the Freedmen's Bureau kind of solved that issue is that when it distributed land, it was to the oppressed people in that community, which means that there was also whites that were oppressed in those same communities that accessed land. So I think that we don't have to reinvent certain things. You know, we already have, Reconstruction was successful despite the misinformation about it. It was defeated, it didn't fail. And that land was an important part of that also.
As an historical footnote, you know that only 1%
of that 40 acres was distributed, only 1%. The person who articulated that 40 acres, as you know, was assassinated. The successor to Lincoln not only did not implement anything, including the Freedmen's Bank, that was in that promise that was made by the U.S. government, but they sought to roll back and also instituted the presence of the Ku Klux Klan when they rolled back the military protection for Africans who were newly freed.
Can I say one more thing? Me particularly, I'm sorry, I'll try to be quiet. But in particular, what I would like to see is the reauthorization of the Reconstruction Act, which is already on the books.
All right, thank you so much. Appreciate your commentary. Anyone else? Moving to funds for cooperative economics, enterprises of socially responsible entrepreneurial development. Anyone want to respond to that? That's point 4. Funds for cooperative enterprise.
Yeah. My background, I have a multidisciplinary background, so not only do I have, I finished my law degree, actually passed the bar as a matter of fact. I also have an engineering degree, mechanical engineering degree, and I'm finishing up my MBA in finance.
Go ahead.
So when we start talking about cooperative enterprises and socially responsible entrepreneurial development, my argument has always been capitalism is not the way to go, right? But what is the way to go? My argument has always been, if we have to interface with a capitalist society, then with everyone outside of our community, we use capitalism. But within our community, we use utilize a different system. So we had, but it goes back to my number one question. Are we nation building or are we not?
Go ahead.
Right? So are we nation building or are we not? So if we're going to have, if we need entrepreneurship, we need economic development in our community, and we need cooperative enterprises where everyone takes a stake. So with that being said, there are other things that we can look at. There's things such as cryptocurrencies, as you may know, it's Bitcoin or Ethereum, but these are really tools for developing nations. And if we are nation building, we are a developing nation if we look at ourselves that way.
All right. Anyone else? All right. Moving to resources for the health, wellness, and healing of the Black community. Anyone want to respond to that?
Well, I'll begin with that. I also, in addition to my research, I also work as a community therapist. So I go into the homes and provide therapy services to different members in the community. And I also work and do research, doing needs assessments. And so from the work that I've done in my master's program and even now, I'm noticing that it's so hard to get our African descent people engaged. And it's like that level of mistrust, even trusting myself, trusting a person of color, trusting a woman of African descent. It's like, I don't know who you are, I don't want to, trust you and what have you. So making sure that this, I just want to emphasize and highlight this, that this is very important to not only to provide funding for the wellness centers and the hospitals, but also providing funding for training so that we can provide culturally competent services and correct the mistrust that's happening within the community.
Thank you very much. Moving toward education. Oh, okay.
Okay, I just want to point out a study by the Institute of Women and Ethnic Studies here in New Orleans. They looked at 1,000 predominantly African-American participants aged 10 to 16. 20% showed signs of post-traumatic stress here. That's 4 times higher than the national average. 48% knew someone who had been murdered. 49% worried that they would be stabbed, beaten, or murdered themselves.
Yeah.
So we know the trauma comes from untreated mental health issues, and that puts these youth at greater risk for behavioral issues. These youth are at higher risk for acting out sexually and becoming pregnant younger. And some of our city's most dire statistics can be attributed to untreated mental illness. We see homelessness, we see family trauma, crime, and addiction all over our city, and these things are very much factors that come about after the mental illness, the PTSD that is rampant in our city.
Thank you very much. Looking at education for the community development and empowerment. Who wants to focus on education? Your response to that?
Again, when it comes to all our DARs, as this brother said, we have to ask the question, are we nation building?
Come on now.
And if we are, then we're going to have to begin with our babies from the minute before they even enter the womb. We have to start praying for them. And we have to teach them. But we don't even know or understand ourselves. And as one of you all said to the brother who, our guest speaker, his grandmother was giving him what he had to come into later in life.
Yeah.
So we're gonna have to learn as educators, and I'm so many years of an educator myself, I don't want to say how many, but we have to teach our children what they may not understand or even know what to do with right now. As you just said about little Kareem, he has about 9 speeches from our ancestors. He don't know what to do with them. He just has a gift to be able to give the words back to us. And we can teach that gift to all of our children.
That's right.
When they go into the classroom, they should be saying things that they may not even know what they're saying.
Well,
but if they keep saying it, it's going to come to them. It's going to become a part of them. Then we can say we're a nation builder. We've got to get on one mind. We've got to get unity. And we have to decide what is it that all of us need to know to survive and to thrive.
Well said. All right.
To speak on the education, so some people in New Orleans know me as an education advocate and activist. because my own children, when I moved here, had to be educated in these New Orleans public school systems. So one thing that I would like to see is a connection with the criminal justice system to education, because there is a direct link to how our children are being educated to what is happening in the criminal justice system. I am a person that, as an American citizen, we all have a right to choose how we want to educate our children. So if you want to homeschool your child, you have a right to. But we are also American citizens, and we have a human right to a free, public, quality education. And so my other point would be with the National Board of Education and African Ancestry, and what I would like to see in that also is that it provide us DNA for our African ancestry. Because how can we truly know who, Africa is not one country, you know? I want to know what country I come from, even to the percentages. So that's what I would like to see included in that education piece and in that knowledge piece, is that we are identifying ourselves to our tribe so that we can Sankofa, so we can go back and take it.
That's good, that DNA.
My question is, when we talk about the historically black colleges, a lot of them, I guess the genesis of a lot of those institutions, right during Reconstruction, like after slavery, are the historically black colleges, are they a part of this demand? Do we hope to incorporate them? And to some extent, the public school system as well. Is it maybe to control that and to reform it, or is it just to blow that up and come up with something totally different for educating our kids? I would be interested in what the thoughts are there.
Appreciate that. Of course, the current Secretary of Education of the United States wants to get rid of public education. So it's interesting, yeah.
Another point that I want to bring up about education was that this country owes us a debt that it cannot repay. So why should I have to pay back any student loans?
Right.
You've miseducated me. You've miseducated my mama. You miseducated my daddy. You miseducated my grandparents.
Well.
And you want me to pay for this education. So I think that we really have to rethink the way that we even look at these, look at reparations in terms of education, especially when we haven't even been educated on what money is, on what currency is. And the fact is at any given time they can devalue the currency. And so here it is we're paying back something that we will never be able to pay back because one, they're not giving us any jobs, right? So we're dependent on the same people that educate us for a job that they won't give us, for taxes that we shouldn't have to pay in general. So just kidding.
All right, now,
Folks shouldn't have to pay no taxes anyhow.
now we're moving to
That's
point
another
7,
thing.
affordable housing. Affordable housing for healthy black communities and wealth generation. Who wants to address that and respond to affordable housing?
Well, to bring it back home, back to New Orleans, and show why these points are so important to us. Our median property value here in New Orleans, on average, the African American home is worth half the value of the average white home here in New Orleans. Home ownership in New Orleans, we have 57% of African American New Orleanians have a deferred dream of home ownership. And also renters, 69% of renters report that they are burdened by the cost of living here in New Orleans.
Thank you very much. Anyone else?
I'm not sure if you all are familiar with the Tremaine area. So I was driving down Orleans Avenue and I see a billboard that says disaster capitalism. And preparing for the hearing, the panel today, I was like, that's what's going on in our city. You all have come, or the white man has come in, seen that we're in a fight, taken, what's ours. So how are we thinking, how does the commission think that we can take back our communities, take back our villages? Because there's so many neighborhoods that have been stripped from us through gentrification, disaster, capitalism. What would that look like? And I would be interested in seeing what points, so how does it be brought together?
All right. All right, thank you. Moving to point 8, so Black America's communication information system being strengthened. Who wants to respond to that? The Chuck Rack? That's a change.
That's where.
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to ask about that is, you're talking about strengthening something that's kind of like dwindling across the board.
That's right.
Like everybody, regardless, because I guess you know that the media solely is being controlled by maybe, 3-4 entities. So it's a difficult thing at this point. So, I guess I just want to make sure that we're mindful of that. Same thing's happening with newspapers, with news stations, with radio, everything.
Well said. So which means we need to identify and create a new paradigm for communication. Just like young people communicate differently than their elders.
That's right.
All right.
We need infrastructure.
Yeah, that's it.
We don't have it. We don't have infrastructure. We don't own spectrum, right? So the airwaves, we don't own that. We don't own any fiber optic cables that allows communication. So also, just not just the mediums, but actually the distribution channels, the spectrum that we utilize to communicate. We talk about the digital divide, people having access to the internet. Now we have a new thing, net neutrality, where that's getting ready to be repealed, where now instead of your internet being treated like a utility, now they can throttle your speeds, which is, in essence, limits your access to information.
That's right.
So, once again, my question is, are we nation building or are we not? Because if we're going to nation build, we have to control and own everything. We have to own the distribution channels, we have to own the infrastructure.
That's right. Thank you. Preserving Black sacred sites and monuments. Who wants to touch on that, if anyone? All right, Chuck. Pass the mic.
Well, I think that's a fantastic idea, but it says preserving Black monuments. I think I heard a sister the other day say in terms of African American women that in the entire country that there are only 10. And so, even if we do a wonderful job of just preserving those 10, then we only have 10. But we know that we've had some remarkable, extraordinary Africans in this country. And so we have to do more than just preserve. We have to create a space where we can have more African Black heroes, statues and monuments. I mean, we have people like right 30 miles west of here, the largest slave insurrection on the North American continent happened there in 1811. We have Charles Deslon. There was Brother Cook and Umano. They were descendants of the Asante tribe. We should have. I would love for our children to walk and see statues of them and say, "Daddy, who's that?" Tell me what they did. So we can't just preserve. We got to create a space where we could present more, where we can create more.
Well said. Well said.
Amen.
Our final point, repairing the damage that has been done by the criminal justice system.
Oh, Lord. That's something there. 40 years before weeds.
If anything, I've caught a lot of heat for this argument, but I said that if anybody should be in the prison industry, it's Black people. We represent the prison industry, and instead of allowing our oppressors to imprison us, we wouldn't be building prisons, we'd be building true rehabilitation facilities.
Yes.
So now, if we rethink the way that they've never done right by us. They've never done right by us. They don't follow their own laws. We say that we live in a democracy, and we do not. We live in a republic. What a republic means that the rule of law is supreme. When there is no rule of law, there is no order. So we're in a state of disorder right now, and this is a beautiful opportunity to be young, Black, gifted, and angry in America. We have a lot to do.
Yeah.
And the fact is that what was considered legal, slavery, was not right. So we're going to have to resort to what is considered illegal means, even though we have the just right to do it. So, talking about taking risks, talking about nation building, that's what I'm about.
I think that this is critical. This is a critical point right here.
Yeah.
And I want to acknowledge my brother that's in the audience. He's right there, Mr. Robert P. Robinson. He's on the radio with me every Wednesday. Stand up, I don't want that to see you, brother. I don't want that to see you. And, you know, this brother right here wrote a book, and I want to encourage everybody to go out and read this book. It's called The Tragedy of Robert Charles. Robert Charles is a brother right here in New Orleans in 1900. He killed like 8 police officers, about 28 white folks or something like that. And Brother Robert, he wrote that book. Now this brother went to Angola when he was 17 years old, and now he's a prolific writer. He has about 10 books. He said, Chuck, you know what kind of rage I had, you know, people sending me to Angola State Penitentiary with grown men. Now, here's a point I want to make. Right now in this city, across the lake, I saw something on television the other day. There was a young brother. He had 2 priors, right? One of them, the first thing was minor. I can't even remember what it was. The second one was a gun charge. The third one, he got in a police chase with the police. It lasted about 5 minutes. He ran in his house. The police go in there and they grab him, right? And so now they're going to multi-bill this brother. You know how much time they gave this man? And this is happening right here under our nose. They gave the dude life. Life in prison, right? Michelle Alexander points out one thing in her book, The New Jim Crow. She said a lot of times people, you know, they get us to believe that, you know, well, young brothers, if they just do better, right? They don't go out there and do nothing, you know, then we ain't got to worry about having so many people in prison. Michelle Alexander said they looked at Finland, Germany, and the United States. They had a similar crime rate over 30 years. From the 60s to the 90s, Finland's incarceration, the crime rate remained the same. The incarceration rate was reduced by 60%. In Germany, the crime rate stayed the same. The incarceration rate stayed the same. In the United States, the crime rate stayed the same. The incarceration rate quadrupled. This is a serious point, and I'm going to say the last thing, Brother Robert. I know y'all just brought a smile to his face because he thinks it all starts with that exception in the 13th Amendment. And so the idea of getting rid of that thing, that brother been working on that for a long time. You know, I think that was always wrong.
I wanted to make a note of this because I don't see this anywhere else, but it's in connection with voting rights, restoring the voting rights. Black people, Americans in general, have a low voter turnout. So if we are going to pass reparations, which is attached to H.R. 40, that requires for us to elect people that are going to pass it. So there has to be some piece in here where we're also talking about politics, I think, or at least connecting some way to grassroots voting.
Yeah, for sure.
Excuse me, brother. Excuse me. As greetings, brothers and sisters. As one of the commissioners, I wanted to just put just a point of order in terms of process. This is not an organization that advocates illegal means. This organization is moving forward by using all of the legal means that are available to us to organize and mobilize our people to advance the demand for reparation, the fight for it, the campaign for it, by all the means available to us, civil disobedience and whatever else. So whenever it is noted, I know that our passion may lead us to make statements as to, you know, what means we might want to use. We really want to make sure that everybody is clear as to where we're going. We're not going to invite the enemy to attack us on the basis of thinking that that's the realm that we intend to advocate. I respect whatever views, and the commission itself respect whatever views people may have, but we wanted to just make that a point of order so everybody is clear. Thank you, brother.
And that is just Judge Lionel Joe providing some wisdom up in the body. And it's only to say that as far as the National African American Reparations Commission is concerned, that we want to be clear what our posture is within the framework of this overall struggle. So that's what we're doing.
May I apologize? I would like to apologize. I would like to apologize. But I would just also say that the Revolutionary
celebrated for breaking the law. So I just want to say that, that we have to keep that within context. But I apologize, but I'm saying that the same people that we celebrate were considered lawbreakers. Martin Luther King was considered a felon. These are all people who were considered criminals, who engaged in criminal activity that was considered illegal. So I just want to apologize on behalf of NAARC, but my views do not change.
No, that's good.
Okay, so what we want to do, let's give the panel a big round of applause for their.
That was good.
What we want to do, however, is there were questions that were raised, and we want to take a period of time to respond or add clarity as we can to some of the points, right? At this phase. So let me try to crystallize some of them. One, I don't know who wants to take on the question of care in relationship to native land. That was an issue that was raised, and I think Dr. Malveaux, would you like to respond to that?
While the United States certainly expropriated native land, quite a bit of it is back to the Homestead Act that I mentioned earlier, with 75 million acres of native land. It also appropriated a significant amount of African American owned land, much of the land that we purchased or were given during the Reconstruction, as the land that we purchased. No one is suggesting that a grant of land to us would take land away from native peoples. That would be the furthest thing from our thinking. But fairness does suggest that there is a grant of land that comes to us. I'm interested in your question, my brother, about whether we're building a nation or not, in terms of whether or not we're asking for certain lands. But I think, in principle, when we look at the period between 1910 and 1960, when we lost more than 10 million acres of land, all here in the South. We're not at all talking about native land, so let's not confuse apples with oranges. We have a right. There are many people who may have claims against these United States, and I think many of them would agree that Native American people have major claims. But none of that minimizes the claim that we, as people of African descent, have, not only for land, but for dollars and for missed opportunities in terms of public policy and everything else. So I don't know where that came from, but I'm going to tell you where I'm coming from. Reparations now.
Can I respond to that as well? Please, thank you. When the brother, he's not there, I raised the issue about land, I just have to channel one of my mentors, Mario Rodelli, because he wrote something at one time, it's a very long time ago, saying, let no one question us. And he said, we apply to ourselves and believe it also logical, humane, and legally correct for the world to apply to us the same standards that permit the Jamaicans to claim the land that they claim, the Cubans to claim the land that they claim, et cetera, et cetera. He said that all of us and each of us are migrant peoples who came into possession of land as a result of campaign of genocide waged by the Europeans. He said that we acknowledge the fundamental right of the Amerindian, the Indians, the Native peoples to this land. But he said if no one questions the claims of the Jamaicans or the Trinidadians or the Colombians, let no person question ours. So again, that's not to say that we're stealing land or whatever, but it's all part of negotiations, part of settlement. It goes back to what the brother said. What are we? We nation building or what? Because if we are nation building, those who believe in nation building know that there is a claim and a right to land. And nation building is one of the points. It is a reparations claim. After the 13th Amendment, we never had the right to decide for ourselves. What we wanted is our political future. International law gave us the right to go back to Africa if we wanted to, not to jump into the ocean and swim naked, but with resources, with reparations. International law gave us the right to go somewhere else. We have been fully fragmented and sent all over the globe. We could have gone to any one of the islands or anything along those lines. International law also says that we have a right, if we wanted, if we decided with full information that we wanted to be citizens of this new nation that was coming up. That was our right, but with the benefit of full citizenship. But international law also stated that we have a right to establish a separate, independent nation state on this soil, because we found ourselves here in large numbers having built up this land. That wasn't right. Now, today in the 21st century, many of us may not feel that that is logical or you know, whatever. And now we're claiming, if you believe in separation, that you're a black identity extremist and subject to surveillance and criminalization. But it is a right under international law to build and develop a nation with land. So, thank you.
Thank you, Assistant Casey and Dr. Malveaux. I don't want to belabor this point, but in telling the history, our true history, we also have to tell the true history of indigenous people on this continent in relationship to African people. And there were many treaties. Some can say they were forced or not. There were many treaties that they entered into with this government against African people. And so we have to understand that, and one of those treaties, with the so-called five civilized nations, was that they would continue to fight on behalf of enslavement of African people. And after the end of the Civil War, another treaty was that they were supposed to pay reparations to the Africans who were African Indians that they had enslaved on those plantations. And part of that was land. And they did not fulfill those obligations. So we have a right to land for the reasons that you both stated, but also for those reasons as well.
There are a couple of other questions that we want to, the question about HBCUs, you know, that's included, the question that you raised, that HBC is in there. That was in there. There's another question here that dealt with the nation building question. We talked about that. The Emancipation Healing Circles, by the way, is referenced. It is in the platform. It's under mental health. Or I mean, not under mental health, but under health. So that is health and wellness is included there. I'm trying to look at one. Let me just say this. There's a piece about voting rights, but it's for permanently incarcerated. I must tell you, in my own thinking, I've been looking at that gap that you talked about. In fact, I reread the platform this morning at 4 o'clock in the morning and looked at that section. I had this my own personal opinion, it's not the commission's opinion, because I happen to think that the 1965 Voting Rights Act, as originally conceived, should be permanent. I don't think it should ever, there should never be amended or something like that. It should be absolutely permanent. And that's a part of, to me, that would be a part of restorative justice in terms of what they took away and all this. We shouldn't have to be fluctuating back and forth and gyrating around. But we haven't talked about that, but I made a note of that so we can talk about how that political rights question could be integrated into this conversation. The criminal, one of the points, let me just say that was not mentioned here is that the criminal justice sections also calls for the freedom of all political prisoners and prisoners of war. And Keisha usually covers that.
I know it does.
Yeah, but I was listening and I picked up that particular point as well. Does somebody want to talk about the Freedmen's Bureau model and why that does apply or how we might address that? Please.
I can address it briefly. I mean, I think when we look at the Freedmen's Bureau model, the first thing we have to look at is the intentionality with which it was set up and the extent to which it was set up to fail. The Freedmen Bank was set up by definition to fail. And so although the intention of the Lincoln administration was to make those enslaved people whole with the 40 acres and mule, the administrators of the legislation were not our friends. They never intended for people to get what they were supposed to get. And so that the Freedmen's Bureau Act is an act that had never been repealed. You're absolutely correct about that. So one could say it's quote still on the books. But I prefer for us to look at HR 40 as we've been doing, and the ways that, not as a study bill, the first version, but as the HR 40B, the action bill, which this commission has been working on with CAM and so many of the others, to talk about ways that land could be distributed, that people could be made whole, the other things that happen. I don't think the Freedmen's Bureau model, as we saw it played out, is one that we necessarily want to go back and look at. Although, again, as I said, I do believe that intentions were good, but execution was awful. And many of our people got caught up in what could best be called a trick bag in attempting to make our people whole.
Okay, we're getting ready to make a transition here, but I'm coming to you, but I'm going to sort of get the transition underway as well, in terms of how we're going to proceed. And that is for those the list of those who want to speak from the audience. I want to get that list, and we want to make sure we have a microphone, someone who's going to hold the microphone for that to happen. So I'm just going to alert people to that part of number one. And secondly, well, they'll bring it to me. It's okay. If you want to just, you have to go out and sign up. There's a sign up sheet outside in terms of.
There's a sign up sheet at the back.
All right. Okay. So the next thing I want to say is I'm going to ask Sister Yvette to make her intervention. And then we're going to go, Cam, I would like for you to deal with the question. There was a question raised about the apology, why the apology should or should not be made and so forth. But as we're going to transition into the town hall meeting part. And while you have the microphone, we want you to also give an update on the status of HR 40 as we embrace it. So that's kind of how we're going to proceed. We got people filing up because the audience wants to get in. So we're going to let you respond. Go ahead.
I just wanted to respond to Sister Elena around the question of mental health. And you spoke about PTSD, and I think we also need to put into that language post-traumatic slavery disorder. And to know that because of who we are and the history of what we've been dealing with, that's already our diagnosis that we walk with on a daily basis. Being Black, that's it. So it needs to be recognized. The question is, what do we do knowing that with all the other obstacles that we're facing on a daily basis? And we also need to get better about talking about mental health in our communities. We have a massive stigma as a clinician, and people don't want to come. They don't want anyone to see them coming into the office. They don't want to, when we go in after a trauma. I'm a trauma responder. When I was a trauma responder, did family stabilization work. People don't want folks to know that you're coming to the home. You have to, if someone opens the door, you have to say that you're something else other than a clinician walking in, and those things need to be addressed. We are in a state of our kids living very schizophrenic lives. They're one way in their homes, and once they step outside, it's a whole nother ball game. So I think that needs to be addressed. And then to Chuck, once again, thank you. I had a blast on your radio show, I have to say. The issue of the monuments and the sacred grounds, I don't think, yesterday, a few of us, Black women, African women on the commission made a statement as it relates to sexual assault towards women of African descent. And one of the things is that we need to start raising the names of Black women and African women who have been those whose shoulders we stand on, and we need to see them. Our kids don't know. I recently did a presentation in the school and showed the kids a film that started from Africa, and they didn't even know any of that. And when I asked when they learned any of this, no one raised their hand. And when I asked, when do you learn Black history? These are 9th and 10th graders. They said in the 6th grade, and they learned about Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and Rosa Parks. After that, nothing. So we need visuals to match the education that we're doing so that they can make that deeper connection.
sign-up list?
Yes.
Larry, would you bring the sign-up list, please? We're gonna take these in segments of 10, but we wanna